I'm back. Last time y'all saw me, I was 23. This time, 24. So that makes me officially in my mid-20s instead of my early 20s. And I mean, I can't think of a more apt word to describe this feeling other than mid. As many of you know, I refuse to accept the passage of time, and so I spent a lot of time looking at 2000s and 2010s pop culture and trying to unpack whatever patterns I can in the raging void of chaos we live in. And the more research I've done, the more I've begun to realize a lot of people wore purity rings back in the day. Early on, we had Jessica Simpson and Britney Spears, but the trend really peaked with people like the Jonas Brothers, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, Demi Lovato, regular characters on this channel, as you know. It was so common that I initially thought that this must be like a precursor to getting a record deal with Disney, like they sit you down and make you be pure. Of course, the truth is a little more complicated than that, but I thought that today we would unpack just why so many teen celebrities publicly pledged their celibacy. First off, I found a lot of this information from a great Jezebel article, which I will be linking below. And I also want to say that I'm not going to go easy on these abstinence groups or these policies, but that does not mean that anybody's individual choice to be celibate is a bad thing. Consenting adults can choose to do whatever they want. All right, let's get into it. Like most bad things in America, this started with Reagan.
Abstinence has been lacking in much of the education.
In the 1980s, Reagan passed the Adolescent Family Life Act, which required the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to launch various sex education programs, which would be great, of course, if it was including comprehensive sex ed. But the real focus of many of these programs was to talk about how much it sucked when young, poor, unmarried people had sex. And these services were also funded by many private Catholic organizations that explicitly taught abstinence-only sex education. Well, that was pretty controversial and ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, which, would you believe, they upheld it in a case called Bowen versus Kendrick. The court held that although the federal government was funding religious institutions, seemingly a violation of the Establishment Clause, since the religious institutions would have to tell the government how they were spending their money, the government could prevent the misuse of funds. Of course, no one bill is responsible for an entire cultural movement. The AIDS epidemic was also a big justification for the pushing of abstinence education.
They call them condoms because it's a con job and they're dumb.
This one is really controversial. You're not going to like it at all. What?
Kissing someone that has it.
Okay, so would you say deep French kissing?
Yeah.
I mean, where you really go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of kissing can put you at risk for this virus because the virus has been.
And generally, the Christian right had a lot of political power in states and nationally. Can you imagine if that was the case today? In 1996, Clinton signed the Welfare Reform Act, which directed Congress to set aside $50 million for abstinence-only education. A 1999 study from the Alan Guttmacher Institute found that 86% of school districts with a sex ed policy required promotion of abstinence, and that 51% of districts required abstinence be taught as the preferred method of birth control. I was fortunate enough not to grow up in an area where abstinence-only education was a thing, but I have to ask, isn't it just telling people not to do it? Why does it cost so much time and money to tell people not to do something? Feels like it'd be easy.
What if I want to have sex before I get married?
Well, I guess you just have to be prepared to die.
When George W. Bush took office, he thought to himself, you know what abstinence education needs? Even more money.
Abstinence for young people is the only certain way to avoid sexually transmitted diseases.
In 2001, he signed the Community-Based Abstinence Education Act. The program received $20 million in 2001 and went all the way up to $113 million in 2007. The law explicitly stated that the program which promoted contraceptive use were not eligible for this funding. And it actually wasn't until the 2007 amendments that they thought to include the rule that medical information that was being dispersed to children must be accurate to some degree. One of the lucky recipients of this federal funding was a program called the Silver Ring Thing. In just 3 years, they received over $1 million in federal funding. Side note, they're still around, but they now call themselves Unaltered. Such a downgrade in branding. The group was started in 1995 and set out to challenge teens to live with sexual purity and integrity. The website claims more than 265,000 teens received a ring through their program as a symbol of their commitment to abstain from sex outside marriage. They claim to utilize what they called positive peer pressure by encouraging those who make a commitment to refrain from premarital sex to challenge their peers to do the same. Of course, they were not the only group selling purity rings at that time. True Love Waits was another popular organization of the 90s which ran similar rallies with the goals of teens signing pledges for their purity and wearing rings on their left ring finger. But Silver Ring Thing was not just any purity culture peddler. They were a cool purity culture peddler.
Silver Ring Thing features a live event that uses the latest in video, music, lasers, lighting, and special effects to create a concert-like show that is exciting and relevant for today's youth.
Yeah, they prided themselves on their use of dubstep, skits, and lasers to really get the kids hyped up for virginity. If you went on their FAQ page back in the day, they had an entire question dedicated to how and why they have so many cool special effects in their show. Weird. They misspelled $1 million in federal funding there. And this wasn't meant to just stop at a ring. The website included a 12-step program. Yes, like that other 12-step program, where you were paired with an abstinence accountability partner. Same gender, of course. And if you talk about how sexually repressed you are with someone of the same gender, it actually doesn't count. And in fact, the religious undertones of this organization were so unsubtle that when the ACLU filed suit against the organization for violation of the Establishment Clause, receiving federal funding for a religious group, even Bush was like, oh yeah, maybe I messed up this one, and withdrew funding from the group before the case was settled. But by the time this lawsuit was brought, 2005, the popular culture was already entrenched in a war on teen pregnancy, federal funding or not. On a cultural level, teen pregnancy was all the rage. We had 16 and pregnant, Juno, the pregnancy pact. If your teenage girl walked outside, she would get pregnant. At least that's what people thought. And just because you were a celebrity teenage girl did not mean that you were exempt from these concerns. Britney Spears, you may have heard of her, got her start on the Disney Channel Mickey Mouse Club. As she made her transition into the megastar we know her as today, many journalists found it socially acceptable to ask this teenage girl whether she had done the deed yet.
I'm just wondering how you feel about all the constant speculation about your virginity and whether you are a virgin or not.
I really wish I would have never said anything to begin with, because I'm kind of stuck in this little place where people are always asking me. But, you know, that's just something that's part of growing up, and that's just something that we all have to deal with, so.
Have there been any changes on that front?
That's a personal question.
Britney initially wore her purity ring, and her virginity was, of course, a major source of headlines at the time. Selling Britney's purity also was an important part of her branding. Even though she was often sexualized in the media and sang songs with plenty of innuendo, as long as she didn't have agency in that sexualization, parents were okay with their kids listening to One More Time. I mean, they can't deny it's a bop. But in 2003, Britney revealed the unthinkable. She had slept with one person. I was 2 years into my relationship with Justin, and I thought he was the one, but I was wrong. I didn't think he was going to go on Barbara Walters and sell me out. And even though Britney and Justin both had sex, it's kind of a thing about that activity, Justin's career skyrocketed, while Britney's was devoured by the press. This was also a time when Jessica Simpson and Britney Spears were pitted against one another, not because the two had personal beef with each other. It was more so because the media and popular culture could only tolerate one pretty blonde girl at a time, so they were constantly forced to battle with each other of who would get this coveted spot. Jessica Simpson was the daughter of a Baptist minister and had worn a purity ring that she was gifted from her father since she was 12 years old. Like Britney, her virginity was a frequent talking point.
Jessica Simpson projects sexuality in her music videos, but in real life, Jessica has made a more conservative choice.
Held on to it for this long, and I only have 3 more months to go.
What Jessica has held on to is her virginity. In 3 months, the singer will be marrying Nick Lachey from 98 Degrees.
And not just with her, but also with her then fiance, Nick Lachey.
Was she your first virgin?
Well, no.
Man, I've never had a virgin. No one.
He's had 2.
Can you imagine? You see what a loser I am?
People were shocked Nick could stand being with a woman who wouldn't have sex with him. I mean, what do? Talk?
So, you meet her, she's hot. You figure, okay, I'll put in some time and I'll bang her. She starts telling you, look, I'm not banging you, I'm waiting until I get married, that's my thing.
Right.
You're saying to yourself, I'll bang her, I'll just wear her down.
When the two married, Jessica said, I'm so lucky I didn't lose my virginity in the back of a Jeep or something. So is society to blame for Nick Lachey today? Probably. Also in this era, the parental advisory label was introduced in 1996, and there was a growing awareness that children weren't just listening to things that were made explicitly for children. They were interested in mainstream pop just like everybody else, and so it wasn't uncommon for musicians in their 20s or 30s to have a large demographic of underage fans. But the former Disney kids, Britney Spears, Jessica Simpson, Christina Aguilera, were adults by the early 2000s, and Disney didn't have the kind of control that they had over these stars like they would with future stars. So how could we protect the children from these adult women living their own lives? Luckily for Disney, they had just discovered the perfect formula to keep their stars kid-friendly and fill that gap in mainstream pop with clean, wholesome stars that their parents could feel good about listening to. Of course, as far as I know, Disney wasn't involved in these stars wearing purity rings. Plenty of Disney stars from that era didn't talk about their faith or purity, like the Sprouse brothers or Raven-Symoné. But the stars who were most heavily pushed during this time came from often deeply religious backgrounds and were encouraged to maintain their wholesome brand with the company. It's to help sell their brands. Parents are making the decision about what's being purchased and want to see if it's a young girl or guy that can be a role model for their children. S. Tia Brown, senior editor for In Touch Weekly. For example, Miley Cyrus was a breakout star for the Disney Channel and was often compared to the bimbos who preceded her. This was, of course, before she became the bimbo who preceded future Disney stars. In a September 2007 interview, the 15-year-old Miley was asked about rumors that she might be pregnant, and she denied this, citing her vow to celibacy. It's given me the street cred to say that would be impossible, because I'm living my life the way I believe is right, and that is to stay pure. Later in 2008, she also said, I like to think of myself as that girl that no one can get, that no one can keep in their hand. Even at my age, a lot of girls are starting to fall, and I think if it's a commitment girls make, that's great. Selena Gomez also wore a purity ring, starting when she was just 13.
Olika wants to know, do you have a purity ring? I do. She wants to know if that's my purity ring. Yes, it is. And another person asked what it says. It says that true love waits.
Yes, and I have a necklace that says true love waits too.
We're big believers in that.
In 2008, she told the story of asking her father for a promise ring. According to her, he went to church and got it blessed. He actually used me as an example for other kids. She said, I'm going to keep my promise to myself, to my family, and to God. Later in 2010, when she started dating Justin Bieber, she said that she regretted talking about this publicly and said that she would rather not address her choice. I never want to put any pressure on my fans, she said, adding that the ring is not important for anyone else but myself. Probably the most infamous example of Disney purity rings were the Jonas Brothers.
Purity rings and their promises to ourselves and to God that will stay pure till marriage.
The brothers were kids of, again, a Christian minister and got their start as a Christian rock band for their local church. According to Joe, he was introduced to the Abstinence program when he was around 10 years old. Him and Kevin pledged then, and Nick would join them when he was a little older. Ironically, Nick got his purity ring at Disney World, not only pledging his commitment to purity, but also his contractual obligations to the mouse. Joe said the brothers initially had no plan to discuss their purity rings, but of course you have 3 young boys wearing rings on their fingers, and everyone is like, are they married already?
We were in an interview one day. The guy asked about him. We're like, we don't want to talk about it. He's like, well, I'm just going to say you're in a cult. And we're like, we're scared to death. It was like one of our first interviews. So we're like, fine, we'll talk about it. We explained, just like I did to you. He runs with it. The next thing you know, it's the Jonas Brothers and their purity rings. And that was like what people ran with forever. That was a running joke. And we found the humor in it sometimes, but of course, we just kind of decided at one point, we're like, look, this is not who we are. We don't need to be like wearing these anymore. Let's just, like, this is annoying. People are making fun of it anyway. We can make fun of it ourselves.
The brothers seem to get some of the most intrusive questions and public ridicule, and although the brothers laugh about it now, constantly talking about your sex life at a young age was incredibly uncomfortable and unwanted. Nick Jonas later said in 2019, it was very tough to digest in real time, trying to understand what it was going to mean to me and what I wanted my choices to be, while having the media speak about a 13-year-old sex life. I didn't know if it would fly in this day and age. Joe has also talked about a time where he felt really scared during an interview where a reporter came in and demanded answers to, again, very intrusive questions. Joe said, I remember this interview with this guy whose entire agenda was to focus on the rings. He kept pushing the subject, and when we insisted that we didn't want to talk about it, he told us, I can write whatever I want, which terrified us. That's the thing. We didn't know any better. and we just wanted to make people happy. Of course, Joe, as a teenager, didn't realize that he's not obligated to answer questions that make him uncomfortable, and I'm sure it was exhausting to deal with people feeling constantly entitled to details of your personal life that no ordinary person would be expected to disclose. Brothers in their rings were so prominent that they even had a dedicated bit on South Park. But of course, the most uncomfortable moment was when Russell Brand was the host of the MTV Music Awards. He thought it would be hilarious to have a little bit about their purity rings when the boys were then 15, 19, and 20.
I'm beginning to wonder, are the Jonas Brothers quite what they seem? Because if they were, how come I've got this little ring now? I mean, initially he was a little bit reluctant, but eventually he sort of saw that it was for the best. And let me tell you, it was an enjoyable and pleasant experience, and I wish the rest of the Jonas Brothers the best of luck, because over the course of the evening, I want a collection of these bloody things.
Luckily, fellow purity ring wearer and American Idol winner Jordan Sparks came to the boys' rescue.
I just have one thing to say about promise rings. It's not bad to wear a promise ring because not everybody, guy or girl, wants to be a slut. All right, so
Look at poor John Legend. He didn't ask for this. Jordan eventually did walk back this statement. I wish I would have worded it differently. Someone who doesn't wear a promise ring isn't necessarily a slut, but I can't take it back now. Don't worry, you can still be a slut whether you wear a ring or not. She continued. It was a split-second thing, and it came out wrong. Still, I don't regret it. Nick and Joe both eventually chose to take off their rings before getting married, and Kevin ended up waiting till marriage when he married his wife in 2009. Remember when Kevin had a reality show? But this focus on purity had a very real and very unfortunate boomerang effect, where engaging in normal teenage behaviors like having a boyfriend or taking private pics of themselves were scrutinized and hyper-sexualized. Both Miley Cyrus and Vanessa Hudgens had private pictures leaked online. There were rumors that Vanessa would even be replaced for the next High School Musical movie. She issued this apology. I want to apologize to my fans, whose support and trust means the world to me. And Disney had to make its own statement also on Vanessa's behalf, saying it regretted Hudgens' lapse in judgment. Miley was only 15 when her computer was hacked, and pictures of her cuddling with her boyfriend were leaked, and again she had to apologize for pictures that were posted without her consent. Content warning: for brief discussions of SA, skip to this timestamp if you do not want to hear it. Demi Lovato, of course, also wore a purity ring, and as I've discussed previously on this channel, they revealed in their YouTube docuseries that while they were filming on the set of Camp Rock, they were SA'd.
And I internalized it, and I told myself it was my fault because I still went in the room with him. I still hooked up with him. Here was the thing, I was a part of that Disney crowd that publicly said they were waiting till marriage.
Of course, if you feel emotionally able to, I do recommend listening to Demi tell their own story. Demi's story is unfortunately part of a much larger pattern that has emerged from purity culture. Women particularly, but all people, were made to feel like damaged goods even when they were victims of unwanted harassment. In 2009, Jessica Valenti released The Purity Myth, which, alongside other research coming out at the time, helped increase public awareness of the harm that these pledges and rings were having on youth culture. More than 1,400 youth balls, where young girls pledged their virginity to their father at a prom-like event, were held in 2006. The balls were federally funded. Facebook is peppered with purity groups that exist to support girls trying to save it. Schools hold abstinence rallies and assemblies featuring hip-hop dancers and comedians alongside religious leaders. Whether it's delivered through a virginity pledge or a barely dressed tween pop star, the message is the same. A woman's worth lies in her ability, or refusal, to be sexual. Studies were available as early as 2007 that despite the millions of dollars that were spent on abstinence-only education, it had minimal impact on teen behavior, whereas comprehensive sex ed led to delays of sex, increase in contraceptive use, a fewer number of partners.
When I first saw the report, I was amazed. They would show the score for the experimental group and the score for the control group, and those bar graphs were just exactly the same height.
In 2005, an 8-year study conducted by Yale and Columbia found that teens who had pledged celibacy were almost as likely to get an STD as someone who hadn't made the pledge at all. The study also found that these teens were less likely to use contraceptives and more likely to engage in risky behavior that didn't technically get rid of a person's virginity. All you have to do is look up soaking on TikTok, and I think that can answer some of your questions. But in 2008, we saw a change. A change we can all believe in.
How to get up, it's Memorial Day weekend.
President Obama began slowly shifting federal funding from abstinence-only education to more comprehensive evidence-based sex education. He fully cut funding for abstinence ed in 2015. But of course, Trump reinstated a lot of this funding. He loosened the requirement for efficacy evidence and emphasized what he called sexual risk avoidance. Even so, the teen pregnancy panic had begun to dwindle. In 2015, Selena Gomez said, "I'm not embarrassed to say that the ring has come off. I got it when I was 13, and I respect so much what it represented, but it isn't for everyone." The Jonas Brothers are all married now, but Nick and Joe were open about their decision to stop wearing them and just how uncomfortable those years were for them.
Are you a virgin?
And of course, as these stars grew up, new Disney stars came to replace them. In 2016, Zendaya said, "I would much rather be in love and have the full experience with the person I'm doing that with," adding that everyone deserves to be in love. But she also said, as long as you protect yourself and get tested periodically, then by all means, go and do what you gotta do. Now, in my opinion, this was never about morality. This was about control, power, and shame. Teen idols were expected to model chastity for an entire generation at the risk of fading into irrelevancy. And teens across the country headbanged to dubstep in the hopes that they wouldn't be discarded, like Britney or Jessica. Congress spent $2 billion on domestic abstinence-only education just between 1982 and 2017. And with the current Supreme Court justice saying we should look into the case that gave us the right to contraceptives for married couples, this conversation is clearly far from over. But I hope you found this topic as interesting as I do, and let me know your comments down below. But of course, remember to please be kind to one another. And at the risk of sounding corny, I really appreciate y'all. I hope you're all taking care of yourself, being kind to yourself and to others. And if you like this video, maybe like it, maybe subscribe. I don't know what that is, but I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.
Come on, Cal. Turn on the computer.
Dad, you don't turn on a computer. You load the system.